I was born and given the name Keynes George Kelly. Keynes is very unusual. I don't know of any other person with that name. But it was given to me by my grandfather, who was the only person in my family who actually read books.
Oh.
And he gave me that name. Many years later, I realized through research that the name is actually an Irish name. It comes from the same root as Kennedy and Kenneth and so on. And that I suppose it went well with my last name, which is Kelly, which is my father's name. After living life, traveling to Africa, spending time getting to understand through my art what it meant to be an African, I decided I would choose an African name. And I came across a Yoruba name, which was Fowokan. And Fowokan means, in the Yoruba language, one who creates with the hand. So it's the Yoruba word for the artist, which I see myself as an artist more than anything else. But not artist in that strange kind of commercial notion of the word, where you have an agent who takes 85% of your life. I create art because art is a way of expressing certain ideals that is necessary in any kind of community. It's not necessarily or generally acknowledged or recognized by white establishment art or institutions, but it is my community, it's for my community, a necessary element within my community.
It's interesting because I was going to ask you the origin of your name, but you got there without me even asking you, so which is perfect. So I wanted to know, in terms of obviously you spent part of your childhood in Jamaica and part of it in the UK or adolescence. How did that shape you as a person, growing up in those two different environments and having to migrate to Britain at a certain age?
Well, I left Jamaica at the age of 14. So essentially I lived my formative years on that island. Left there in 1957 and discovered the world, discovered the universe based on the culture of that little island, where you have a large percentage of Africans who the kind of establishment denies their Africanness, degrades notions of things African. So everyone is often running away from being an African. And so, you had to negotiate very carefully in the space if you were going to say proudly, I'm an African in Jamaica in those times. After or while I was growing up there, the Rastafarians came along with notions of Africa, Africa as Zion, a place to return to based on Marcus Garvey's theories. And that in the 1940s and 50s when I was growing up was popular culture and the evolution of the Jamaican music from the mid-1950s, which took on this notion of Africa as Zion. It was dominant in the music. So when I came here, it was like a whole new reality because I saw real Africans for the first time. And they didn't have tails. They didn't live in trees. And they didn't what? Run around missionaries in pots. Some of my best friends were Africans who came here from West Africa to study. And for sure they didn't have tails. So, it was a real kind of eye-opener, seeing real Africans, and then my school taking me to the Ornament Museum which is not far from here, from where we are. And I saw real African art for the first time, stuff from Benin and Ife, which is some of the most incredible works of art ever created by mankind. And of course that kind of reinforced whatever positive I had, whatever little positive I had around Africa and being an African from the Caribbean. But something happened the morning my mother took us to be registered, Lambeth Education Authority in Acre Lane. We were crossing the road in front of Lambeth Town Hall, and this crazy Jamaican man rushed up to my mother and said, "Don't make a picnic of them talk like them people here." I'll never forget it. And he just stormed off. But I've never forgotten that, because what it meant was, don't let your child become these people. Don't let them walk, don't let them talk, don't let them behave, let them remain who they were. Because my younger brother, who plays with a band called Simandi, I don't know if you know the band, it's a well-known band, had big hits in the US. He was 7 at the time. And even though, you know, he went to primary school here, he still kept his essential nature, the nature of the Jamaican who came here back in the 1950s.
Okay. It's amazing what things stick out, and sometimes the people that we call mad have a very profound message.
That's right.
I am skipping a part of your life here, but in terms of, I know you were part of the band yourself at one point. I do know that.
Yes,
I do know that.
Founding member.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't going to sign a contract and sign away my life to generally unscrupulous people. And I learned that from being in a band, and some people came around and they took us up to Abbey Road studio with the Beatles, and we were so excited, and they recorded enough tracks for an LP, and then they came around with a bottle of brandy, and we drank the brandy. We never saw them again. A few months later, we saw ourselves in the record shop, a record on a label called K-Tel, from back in the early 70s, and that was me. I've never signed anything with any of those people, and people have approached me to sign me as an artist, and of course I chased them away, because a lot of them want 60, 70, as much as 85% of your work.
That's crazy.
And that I will never give them. So yeah, I didn't sign a contract with the management of Simandi, and just sort of went my way. But of course, my brother's the drummer in the band. My cousin is one of the saxophonists, and so they were rehearsing in the cellar that I created in Brixton. So it was very, and then eventually went on tour with them in the US in '73 for about 5 months, and it was a real eye opener, that tour in the US. Just how the African Americans were, what their position was within the community, the level of influence they didn't have based on their numbers and so on. But it was a really eye-opener. And then after that, when I got back, in '74, I was offered a job as a sound engineer with Jimmy Cliff to travel to Nigeria to do a tour. And that was my first visit to Africa. It was actually a kind of life-changing, not just a mind-changing stuff, but a life-changing. Because after living there and being stranded there for several months, I came back with the spirit of Africa, because I've been to a lot of places in Africa, but that Nigeria is the most powerful. Absolutely, it's like you can cut the spirit with a knife. It's absolutely amazing. And I can now understand where the ability to create those bronze Benin and Ife bronzes come from.
Okay. It's funny that you mentioned Nigeria and you went to Benin City, if I remember.
Yes, we had an audience with Jimmy and Oba, who is the spiritual ruler of the Yoruba people.
How was that? How was Benin, Nigeria, a catalyst in your work in order to become an artist? Like, what is that? Is that when you're talking about the spirit of Africa, or did you
Yes.
see artists out there?
No, I didn't. I mean, there's one artist that I actually, when I was stranded, there were a couple of Caribbean women who took me in, but they also had an artist, a carver, living in one of the little houses, those outhouses, with his family, and I brought back one of his carvings, amazing piece of art, out of ebony, yeah, and he was the only artist that I actually met. Very humble person. You wouldn't believe that he would create such amazing pieces of art. That piece is actually with my daughter and granddaughter over in North London.
Okay, all right. So I know that in order, like, your work is clearly exceptional and it's fantastic, but one of the most interesting things about you that I learned about is that you actually didn't go to an artist school. You're actually self-taught.
Well, no, I didn't go to. I left school. I came here, and I spent 2 years at a school in just outside Brixton, Kennington Secondary for Boys, and it was 2 years of induction, if you like, introduction to British society. Didn't learn much in terms of academic, but what I did learn was a lot about the society through my fellow school, pupils. So I remember about the third or fourth week after going to the art classes, because art was something I loved. I used to paint and draw at the drop of a hat as a child in Jamaica. I came here, and so I painted what was in my heart, what was in my head, which is actually the Blue Mountains, the coconut trees, the banana trees, and stuff. And the teacher was so negative towards what I was doing. And I walked out of the class. It's about the third or fourth lesson, and never went back to another art. And that was the end of art for me. But I discovered Picasso and was totally bowled over by Picasso's work. Later on, I discovered the Africanness in Picasso, because this was maybe about a year after I'd left school. I memorized one of his paintings, came home a couple of days later, went out and bought a canvas and oil and painted this. It's like a saucepan and a candle, in a very sort of strangely optical illusion kind of. It's one of his well-known paintings. And from then on, I just kept painting and then carving. But I never felt that the institutions could teach me anything, the things that I wanted to know. So, for example, that teacher in secondary school didn't know what I was painting, didn't understand what I was painting. And I suspect if I had painted London as I saw it then, and the people, which was like dark, foggy, because I came here in September. In fact, we landed on the 1st of September 1957, and I started school a couple of weeks later. And then we had these thick pea soupers back then, which was like smog, thick fog that you couldn't see anywhere. And then for the first time, I saw chimneys with smoke coming out of houses, that the only time you would see that is at the cement factory in Kingston, or the foundry, or the place where they tan leather, the tannery. So we only saw smoke coming out of chimneys from factories, and then smoke was coming out of houses here. I couldn't paint that. You understand me? I couldn't understand because all the houses looked like factories anyway. There was no connection with the images around me. And of course, that was the teacher. That was his experience of life. He had no idea what it's like to run barefooted through broken glass. You understand?
Yeah.
Which is what I try and recreate in the art that I produce, even though I've been here for 60 odd years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still run. If you look at me, I'm barefooted right now. You
True.
understand? So that's a kind of spirit that you can't really, if you like, create out of life here. And I've held on to that because of the old man, the madman telling me.
Yeah. Makes sense, that makes sense. But one thing I would say, I would really want to ask you is that because you're self-taught, what does it take to continuously develop that skill and know that you're going in the right direction and you're doing the right thing? Because mentally that must have an impact on you, whether it be positive or negative. Like, because when you're trying to master something that you're getting hands on, getting to grips with.
Well, getting hands on the material is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Getting hands on or your mind around the more abstract that is put into the art, which some people would call spirit, is much more complex. Because you can pick up a book and read technically how to create a mold, yeah, how to mix materials and so on. And because I'm self-taught, I don't go down a narrow road. I use a vast array of materials, vast array of techniques. But I think what happened after I left school, I started reading. I just fell in love with books. I read. Sometimes when my friends are out for playing, a couple of weeks they wouldn't see me. I'd lock away.
Like me.
I'd lock myself away and read.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd finish with the reading and I'd go out and go and hang around Brixton and do all kinds of strange things. But reading and acquiring knowledge, not just knowledge that is passed on in a kind of structured way through school, through college, through university, but knowledge that you, if you like, evolve yourself. So I go back to reading the ancient classics from Aristotle, Socrates, all of those guys. I read Jung, Freud, and then I go and study ancient Egypt to understand, the origins of all these others. And if I didn't find it out myself, nobody would have told me that Western civilization originated in Egypt, that went through to Greece, that went through to Rome, and then civilized the rest of the uncivilized savages in the north and west. I wouldn't have known that because nobody would tell me that. So that kind of knowledge is what you actually, if you like, realize in the work that you do. Because I remember I was invited to give a presentation of my work at the National Portrait Gallery. The people had only seen my simple portraits based in some kind of classical format. And then I showed them a whole range of the works. And after that, they stopped talking to me because what I was doing was seen as iconoclast. That means that it destroyed notions of sacred icons.
Mm-hmm.
You understand me? And you couldn't get that if you go to the university system because they make sure that you don't come out as an iconoclast. They beat that out of you. But you need to be. If you're a black artist and you're not an iconoclast, you're not really serving your community's purpose.
Wow.
And to me, serving my community's purpose is primary.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah. All right. So we've gone what led you to art, history, etc. Done that. When you decide to create a piece, what process are you going through? Done that. Is there a moment where you said to yourself, it might have been what you've just said, is there a moment, actually I think you've just said it really, is there a moment where you said to yourself you knew that this was your calling, that you knew that this is what you were supposed to do?
Yes, I think there was a piece, I can't define the actual piece when it said, you are now an artist, you're now a master, and you need to choose the name of an artist. And that's when I took on the name Fowokan. One who's initiated, but it's a form of self-initiation. Because in the old days, you would have the masters and you'd go through certain rituals and you would be transformed. But there was nothing like that around me. So essentially I transformed myself, initiating myself into what I felt was necessary for me, but wasn't within the culture and society I lived in. So I had to do it myself. And a bit arrogant, like Napoleon crowning himself emperor.
In terms of like, how did you, was it a thing where you had to work and still do it at the same time, you had to work a job, or like how did you support yourself? Because it's quite a serious task to take on, as you can see. Right?
Yes,
Right. Yeah.
well, I think I left the post office as a postman. They made me redundant in 1971. And I've not been back into any kind of establishment work since then.
Okay, wow.
Hustle and scuffle, as they say in Jamaica. You hustle and scuffle. Well, at a certain point, I started doing, when I came back from Nigeria and decided, well, the spirit needs some way of expressing itself through me, I started making arts and crafts. It's a long journey from creating rubber tire sandals, which is what the original Rastas in Jamaica used to wear. And I brought back a pair from Lagos. I saw on the waterfront all these guys with these rubber tire sandals. I brought a pair back. And then Carnival 1975, I thought, but George, if you make some of them things here, them Rastaman will buy them at Carnival. And that's how it all started.
Okay, wow, all right.
So from making the rubber tire sandals, I had a Jewish friend, at the end of Carnival, I had a Jewish friend who had a store in Portobello Road, and I took the leftover ones from him. I said, what are they? He says, I'm sure I can sell them, but you need information. So I went out, I was working as a part-time media resource up in Hackney in a college, 1 day a week. So he says, create some information that people can understand and know what it is. So I went off and created this poster of a rubber tire with a Rasta head coming through it with his locks dripping down. And that was the first bit of art in the sense of, visual art. From that, I decided I'd do some silkscreen printing and put the images on T-shirts for the next carnival. You understand? So I was working from carnival to carnival. And then I decided I would take them to the record shop, because there were all these reggae record shops all over, as far away as Southall from Brixton. And so I started doing, I met a Trinidadian friend. He says, you can make Rasta jewelry from coconut shell and leather. I made millions of coconut shell and leather with red, gold, and green. Belts, red, gold, and green. 4 or 5 color print posters, which I've got bits of them all still. And that's how I actually started. Halfway through, however, I was still practicing my flute, and it was really, really difficult to survive in the way I was doing it, because sometimes for 2 weeks I'd just so I played the flute and the congas, and the practicing of the flute was so intense that I needed something to release, and I went out and got clay and started modeling to release that tension from the flute playing, just these arpeggios and scales. Because jazz was the thing that I've always been interested in. And so I remember doing some work on my girlfriend's flat, doing some plastering. And one morning I woke up and I thought, but George, you can use the plaster to create these things. Ceramite plaster. Went out and bought a bag of plaster. and this is the result.
Yeah.
Some of the pieces are still in ceramite. That's never been actually cast into a ceramite's a primary material, and then you often cast onto a more permanent material, which in this case is resin and fiberglass, pewter, cement, bronze. Yeah, so that's what actually I was able to survive selling these things. We used to make Rasta ganja chillum from coconut, and everything. And the bookshops. There's about 4 bookshops that sold black books as far away as Southall, Jessica and Eric in Ealing. All of those places I would take the art and the craft, and they would actually. It was enough to feed me and keep the wolves from the door, and naturally I made sure I didn't earn enough money to pay taxes. So I never had to pay any taxes, you see, because I never earned enough money.
Wow. It's very, 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 very insightful.
Yeah, and of course the arts and crafts allowed me the free time to then create a piece of art. And the ceramite plaster is brilliant because what it did was it taught me how to model, and to model is to add. You have a piece of clay and you add, yeah. So you build up from the mixture of plaster and water. You build up a shape, and then you learn to sculpt, because sculpt is taken away. So once the plaster hardens, you get your chisel and your mallet, and you start chiseling it down until you create the object. So I learned both modeling and sculpting purely by accident. And I had a dream. And a lot of things come as dreams that you think, But if you pursue them, it comes from sources of inspiration in the unconscious, in the subconscious, and the subliminal. And you must not just ignore these things. You have to follow them. Education in this country, religion in this country negates stuff that comes up from the subliminal, from the, no. Because if I want you to come and work in my factory producing widgets, there's no way I can get you to do that if you're following what comes from deep down. So I give thanks that I didn't have to, go out there and, because I did a job once, a part-time job in a bakery, loading bread onto a van. All the Friday night and the Saturday.
I'm laughing because I know that wasn't your calling. That's
No!
That's why I'm laughing. I can't imagine you doing that.
But I did it for about 3 months. Because the labour exchange said, you have to do something. They sent me to this place. Then I went to a bottle washing place where and so that couldn't have been my life. I'm sure I would have committed some kind of murder on my own self if I had to do that.
Yeah, self-inflicted.
Yeah.
This question, it might be a personal question, so you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but is there a particular piece like that means a lot to you, that stands out, or is it all of them?
Well, there are several pieces that are quite profound, but I think that piece, which is Meditations Beneath Duppy Cherry Tree, the title take me back through a period of my life when I became a kind of a yogi, and I did meditation, sat cross-legged. I could do all kinds of weird things with my physical. But what meditation taught me was how to actually visualize. So I can sit cross-legged, visualize a piece, and turn it infinite directions, or angles, and see the piece before I actually start. And that was a very important part of my life. And that meditations, that's in the title of that. Duppy cherry tree is a type of berry tree that grows in Jamaica. And one of them was in my schoolyard. and we used to sit underneath this double cherry tree, and they say you don't go underneath a double cherry tree after dark and stuff like that. So those aspects of the other world and how it affected the way you behaved as a child, yeah, comes right through to this piece, which happened which came about when my mother died. After my mother died, and I created the piece using iron resin, which is powdered iron in this resin, it's like they used to make car bodies and ships and stuff. And I made the piece out of this grey iron. This is it in its natural, yeah? And then I buried it. Because my mother's death was such a kind of moment of revelation and transition, Somehow I found myself burying the piece out there, and 6 months later I went and dug it up, and it metamorphosed from this to that.
Okay.
And it was like, and you can see a lot of these iron. But iron is very important in as much as in the Yoruba culture, the thought system, which is called Ifa, right? The god of iron, Ogun, is the patron saint of artists.
Okay.
So Ogun manifests himself in a lot of the works that I do, hence so many pieces in rusted iron. And in that culture, they don't say the iron rusts. The iron actually sweats.
Okay.
When the iron sweats, it turns into rust.
It was about your community and making art that reflects your community. How is your work being received by the community?
Well, that's an interesting one. I think when I first started showing my work back in the mid to late 80s at, say, the GLC Easter fairs on the South Bank, black people used to come up and look at my work in a very aggressive way. What kind of mumbo jumbo voodoo things you're doing, man? Yeah. And of course, a white person would come and look curiously at the piece in an appreciative way. And those same black people would come and look over the white person's shoulder as if to say, what the hell are they looking at? What can they see? That is not some mumbo jumbo voodoo rubbish. That's how it was back in the late 70s and 80s. But now, they will spend thousands of pounds acquiring a piece in bronze. And that's the kind of journey that I've actually experienced and gone through in the 40 odd years that I've been doing this thing. You see?
What keeps you going and what motivates you to keep doing this work?
Well, I don't have anything else to actually make statements with. I mean, I do a bit of video making, I do a bit of poetry, writing, still do a little bit of printing, but the most profound expressions or techniques for expressing those deeper things that come out of the subliminal is my visual art, three-dimensional pieces. And as long as I can, at the moment, I occasionally go up into my workspace and do a couple of hours. It's not as intense as once upon a time. I work in the same room I slept in. If I got up to go to the toilet in the middle of the night and I see the piece and I'd start working at 4 a.m. go back to bed. And that's where it was then. But that was at the peak of its intensity. Now I think about, is the sun out? If the sun is out, then I'll go up and do a little bit of work. But also the drive, the drive to make a statement isn't as intense as it was back in the days when I created those kinds of pieces. But it's still there, I'm never far from a thought. But the thought now is more like completing some of the pieces that are unfinished. See this piece here. This piece I started this piece in 1985.
Okay.
and I completed it about 8 months ago.
All right. Cool.
She's been sitting behind me all this time, as if, and then one day say, "When you gonna do me? When you gonna finish me?" And I had to. And so, in completing this, I have all these other bits and pieces that sitting in my workspace that needs to be completed and gotten out of the way before I can start looking at new things, original ways of expressing thoughts as a 76-year-old man.
Oh, recommendations for old and young people that want to get into your work. So it doesn't matter what age they are. What recommendations would you?
Well, there's a website that I've got quite a range of my images, essays by other people, art by other artists, like visiting artists. But it gives you a sense of the range of what I do. I've also got a YouTube, which is under the name Kines Kelly, as opposed to Fowokan. And you can see me at work creating some of the busts, some of the pieces on that. But essentially the website, and the website has been up for about 4 years. And like I looked at it this morning at the dashboard, and yesterday was over 600 hits.
Oh, wow.
So in the period since I first put it up, it's coming up to 900,000.
Okay.
With
wow.
a lot of hits. So
Yeah,
a lot
that
of
is a
people know of it. They might not study it, but they might see it, and they don't forget the images once they just scroll through. So that's one way. I mean, putting on exhibitions are really, really complex and involve a whole heap of stuff. And because if you're not part of the establishment and you don't actually kowtow to the establishment, your work tend not to be in the prestigious galleries. Because to get in there, you have to actually do a bit of licking. And I'm never, never prepared for that, to do that at all.
Because you're obviously, this is just a general question, not necessarily related to anything, but because I believe that people younger than myself, people my age, people a little bit older than me, are around people that have lots of knowledge, but sometimes we don't tap into these sources. So one of the questions I wanted to ask, if there's anything, like even if it's something that you see going on in society today or something that just crosses your mind, if there was one message that you would like to get to young people all over, what would you like to say to them if there was one message?
Study and understand your ancestral past, because there is no future without the present, and of course the present stands on the past. So if you want to understand where you are, which you have to understand where you're going, you must understand where you're coming from. And it's essential that you find ways of finding out about your African past as Africans, because establishment is not interested in giving you a kind of African perspective of who you are and what you are. So if you watch television, you'll only see Africans come up negatively, especially, starving Africans. But I've been to Africa, and I see more starving people in Britain than in Africa. Trust me. So don't let that be your guide. You have to go out there and find it yourself. And I would suggest to all African people in a diaspora, like the Muslims do, a pilgrimage to Mecca to find themselves. You have to do a pilgrimage to Africa. But you don't just go to Africa and go to the touristic, all-inclusive place outside Mombasa and never see anything else. You have to leave the safety of the city and go and find a village somewhere. Find an old man or old woman and sit and ask them to teach you.
Wow. The last question is, it could be now, or it could be we're all going to pass away someday, but It could be now or it could be after you're gone. What do you want your legacy to be?
Memory or memories of a time when a whole generation became conscious of their Africanness. That's in the diaspora. When we understood for the first time the meaning of Garveyism, the meaning of our return. Yeah, I think that's it. The enlightenment, the beginning of a certain type of enlightenment that is necessary for us to make decisions about the future.
Right. Thank you.
He says, however,
What?
I'd like to commission you to do a bust for my son.
Mm.
And I go, and he says, no. He says, I know you don't do white people. He says, I know you don't do white people. But, he says, I want a bust of my son that is done with spirit.